And you're listening to Flashpoints. This is the Election Crimes Bulletin. It's been a long time, but we welcome back Greg Palast. Greg Palast is really a hero of this show. He is the author of How Trump Stole 2020, The Hunt for America's Vanished Voters. He is a filmmaker, journalist, the author of several New York Times bestsellers, including The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. We sort of found Greg in another country trying to report about an election taking place in the United States. Greg Palast, it's a long time since we first spoke to you at the BBC. Welcome back.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the welcome, but I wish I didn't have to come back. Back in 2000 when I uncovered that tens of thousands of black men were removed from the voter rolls of Florida. You were one of the only people that put me on the air to report that. But I thought once it came out and finally the establishment press picked it up, that's how Bush won the election, by removing black people purging. I thought that'd be the end of it. And, we're going to have a Help America Vote Act and all that stuff. But in fact, we are in the worst Jim Crow period since the Voting Rights Act of 65. We are in the worst shape. And if you go to gregpalast.com, you can read my story, which is how Trump and the GOP fixed 2026. Yes, 2026. This is the year of the Great Purge. So that's what I want to talk about is, because we talked before about how Trump used vote suppression to win the race. Not for Jim Crow vote suppression tactics, and I give my numbers. The numbers I used for the ACLU and NAACP Black Voters Matter Fund when I went to federal court, 3,565,000 votes were denied. Mostly people of color, either they were blocked from voting or their ballots were discounted. And it's going to get worse as we head forward into 2026. And the big thing that's happening, I know that the Democratic Party and others tend to go to sleep in what they call off years. Well, there's no off years for vote suppressors. So understand how our system works. The number one threat to voters, and voters of color in particular, young people, is the purging of the voter rolls. And that happens in the year before the election. Under federal law, the system of purging using computers to mass wipe out voter registrations. This is not about changing ballots, Dennis. This is not about people who talk about Musk sending spiders from outer space to change the vote tabulating machines. Take off your tinfoil hats, guys. This is stuff that I get from the government itself, from the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission. Under the law, states must purge their voter rolls in the year before the election. Now, some states use that to remove people who are dead. They shouldn't vote. People who have moved out of their jurisdictions, they shouldn't vote in those jurisdictions. That's correct. But we found, I say we, the groups, I'm a statistician by training and an economist, we uncovered for the ACLU, went through every single name on the purge list, obviously using computers, using the experts from Amazon and the U.S. Postal Service, or I should now call it, now going to be privatized, it'll be the U.S. X Service. And we used the experts, and they went through name by name and found out that the lists are 63.3% erroneous. That is, 2/3 of the people on these hit lists who aren't listed as dead should not have been removed. I've talked many times about, like, the people I've met, like Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin, I was there when she was thrown out of a polling station because she was purged. So the big purge is this year, 2025. And last year, or the 2023 leading to 2024, 4,776,000 people. Sorry to give you numbers. Let's call it 5 million, Dennis. 5 million people were wrongly purged off the voter rolls. 5 million. Now, some of them come back. Some of them wouldn't have all voted for Harris. Some of them wouldn't have voted. But the bottom line is that probably Harris in that pile lost 2 million votes. And I'm telling you, as a statistician, I give you the more exact numbers, doesn't matter. You can go to my article and do some arithmetic yourself. But let's put it this way. The trend is not good, Dennis, because when I did my first studies, they were removing 300,000 people. The next study, I was 18. Next study, 2020, and this is the state of Georgia alone, they were removing 500,000 people. In 2023, they targeted 875,000 Georgia voters. That's about 1 in 6 Georgia voters, overwhelmingly voters of color. 1 in 6 Georgia voters was crossed off the voter rolls. After all these other purges, there's no illegal voters left. They never were illegal. I've always said, if you find an illegal voter, arrest them. You know, if you rob a bank, they're going to close your bank account, they arrest you. So if you have an illegal voter, arrest them. They can't find these illegal voters. But this is the beginning. So 2025, expect the massive, massive purge of the voter rolls. That would be the first thing we're looking at. And Dennis, I want to throw in, I know I'm kind of filibustering here. You can ask some more questions, but the next thing I'm really worried about, 2 things. Well, I should say. One is the SAVE Act. And I have been talking to some Democrats and other activists. I'm in Chicago now talking to, I was supposed to meet with the mayor today, but he couldn't make it, but meeting with Jesse Jackson. A lot of people are hoping that we could pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Well, forget about it. Agent Orange is president. They are pushing the GOP to pass something called the SAVE Act. And that is that's going to create new national requirements for voting, including a proof of citizenship in order to vote. Now, look, no one but a citizen should vote in an American election. That's fine. That's the law. If a non-citizen votes, you do and you should go to prison. They never find any. Never. Almost never. And when I say almost never, the state of Florida picked out 179,000 people to remove as alien voters. And, you know, so I said, are you going to find, if you find an alien voter, are you going to arrest them? He said, oh, yeah. You know how many they found? Out of 179,000, how many illegal alien voters there were? Take a guess, Dennis.
1?
You're right. 1. You read the article. A Republican from Austria was the only illegal voter out of 179,000. Now, I'm laughing, but if you go to my site, you will see a gentleman, Sully Anselmi, who was going to be removed from the voter rolls until he had to show up at a court, take a day off work, go to a courtroom, and prove that he is an American citizen. Now, I know that he is a person of color, but he's still an American citizen, believe it or not. And this is the game that's being played. Now, they got this list. Where did Florida get this bogus list? Well, they actually they got the list from the Department of Homeland Security. They got a list of people who were deported. Well, believe it or not, there's some people named Jose Garcia that got deported. So what Florida did, they took every Jose Garcia and said, you lose your vote unless you can prove you aren't the Jose Garcia that was deported. I'm not kidding you. That's what they were doing. So these are just people who are on a list of deported or a list of people applying for citizenship, not yet citizens, but now they are citizens. So the Obama administration had warned Florida, if you use that list from Homeland Security of deportees, that's not a voting, that has nothing to do with voting. You're not going to find illegal voters there. Because, by the way, Dennis, I don't know what your experience is, but if someone doesn't have papers, the last thing that they're going to do is say, here I am, I'm registering to vote. It's so dark, you have to laugh. But this is really dangerous. Here's a few things that are very scary. There are, I calculated about 31 million people a year change their voter registration, usually because they move from one county to the next. And 31 million people a year. Well, guess what? When you re-register, you say, well, the new registrants, it doesn't affect me. It affects you because if you're one of the 31 million who changes your registration because you moved, you know, from San Francisco to Alameda or whatever, you will have to prove your citizenship. Now, do you remember where your mommy put your original birth certificate? There's basically 3 documents. I mean, there's some others, but basically 3 documents that prove citizenship: a passport, an original birth certificate. Copies don't count, my friends. You have to have that original one, and naturalization papers. Now, again, they know what they're doing. Who has passports? Well, here on the south side of Chicago, ain't a lot of people going to France for vacation. They don't have passports. Who has passports? The rich and the white. Okay, let's be very clear what they're doing. Who has their original birth certificates? Well, people who have nice, neat, clean records and haven't been evicted from their apartments and haven't moved around from one apartment to the next or caught in the floodwaters of Katrina. Not many people know where their birth certificate is. In fact, the Brennan Center calculated that 21 million people right now have no idea where they can find any document that relates to their citizenship. Now, this was tried once before. Chris Kobach, one of our great hero, Chris Kobach of Kansas, KKK for short, when he's now Attorney General of Kansas, when he was Secretary of State, he ordered a requirement to show your citizenship to vote in the state of Kansas. You got to show citizenship. Well, that knocked out 32,000 new registrants. And it was almost entirely students, except for a large contingent of people in the Air Force who'd been assigned and who moved to Lawrence, Kansas at the Air Force base there. So they had Air Force officers and students who could not vote, 32,000 of them. The ACLU sued, Chris Kobach admitted that of the 32,000 people blocked from voting in the 2016 election, by the way, not one, he admitted under oath, not a single one was an alien voter. Everyone was an American citizen. They just didn't have those papers. That's what's going on. So it's voters of color, in that case, students who are blue, the color blue. And a lot of the military people were overwhelming, that didn't have their birth certificates, were overwhelmingly African-American officers. Again, if 31 million people change their registrations every year, so very, very quickly they're going to cull down those voter rolls. And that's one of the most dangerous things that's coming up for the 2026 election. And here's the other bad news about that, Dennis, which is that even if that law somehow doesn't pass, the SAVE Act, and pretty much, the Musk presidency gets its way. Even if that bill doesn't pass, the secretaries of state of these right-wing red states mostly, like Brad Raffin's purge, or the Secretary of State of Georgia, have requested that Kristi Noem, the new Homeland Security Secretary, give them the SAVE list. After what happened in Florida, where 179,000 people were challenged on their right to vote. And by the way, most of them did lose, I don't know most, but tens of thousands did lose their right to vote because they just couldn't take a day off to go to court and prove that they were who they were. So the government sealed those records. It cannot be used, so it could not be used by these red state secretaries of state. Well, now, with Noem in, the ultra Trumpster, they're asking that she release those databases so they can do the Florida on their list. They liked what happened in Florida. Yeah, they found only one illegal alien voter, but they knocked off tens of thousands of voters of the wrong color. And you're going to see that in Georgia. I don't know how many other states are making this request. But this is the danger. They don't even have to pass the law to put this into effect, Dennis. People have to wake up.
Greg, you have really made this a study at the center of your life, and you've made crucial information available to millions of people who would not have known how fragile the system is. And we see the things we see unfolding now, and the lack of control really there is over the federal system are things you hinted at for a long time in terms of how, if the wrong person gets into office, look what they can do. I know you've been talking about this a long time, Greg. How bad, let me just ask it this way, are we worse off now than we were 20 years ago in terms of fighting to protect the vote? What's the up 100%, and the down?
100%. I feel bad about it. It's been almost 25 years I've been on this beat. I mean, I do other things. It's hard to imagine other investigations, from because I'm an economist. But this just won't let go. And it's very hard to get other journalists interested because it requires a lot of math and a lot of work, and I have to go to federal court to get this information. So
Did
it
Trump
tends to be a
win
bit
or
lonely.
lose the last election, Greg? Did Trump win
Oh,
in your
he
estimation?
officially won, but if it were not for Jim Crow trickery, and this is pretty careful analysis. This is my field. This is I literally go into federal court with this. I issued these reports for the ACLU and others where I do the calculation. So when you read my journalistic stuff, understand it's just a distillation of my expert testimony work. And Harris would have gotten another 3,565,000 votes. That would have so she'd have beat Trump by 1.25 million on the popular vote, but more importantly, she'd have won Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, which would have put her in the White House with 386 electoral votes. Again, this is not a partisan analysis. It's just how it is. But here's the problem. Also people ask me if there's discourse. I've been talking to some great people like Harvard professor Lawrence Lessig, who's taken some of this on with me. So we're creating some good teams, but it is going backwards. The SAVE Act coming in, the court cutting the heart of the Voting Rights Act. But what's happening is, first of all, the reason we're going to have massive purges and other problems is that the cops on the beat, that is the voting rights police, the United States Justice Department Civil Rights Division, is now a civil wrongs division. Anyone who wants to protect the voters, they're not just going to be pushed aside. They're going to lose their jobs. They're hunting. It's a kind of pogrom of progressives within this administration. And even, I say progressives, even kind of justice-minded Republicans. It's absolutely frightening what's happening. And so those people who are worried that Trump is going to call off the 2026 election, why would he? I mean, Putin's never called off an election. He just shoots his opponents. He gunned down Nemtsov, his first opponent, in front of the Kremlin. He literally gunned him down. Navalny was arrested and poisoned and killed in prison. So Putin doesn't call off elections. Trump won't call off elections. All he has to do is continue to Jim Crow this system, to take the system that gave him 3.5 million votes he didn't deserve and make it worse, so that it's just going to be impossible for any opposition to win the votes to pull his gangsters out. And I don't use the term gangsters just for color. This is gangsterism.
And again, you're listening to Flashpoints. Greg Palast on KPFA Pacifica Radio. For years, we've been working with Greg on his amazing work around voter suppression. You're actually sort of in related adventures. You're out to Osage country, aren't you? To tell us about that.
Yes. Okay. So my next film, and these things are related. There's no such thing as, my voting issues, and then I'm dealing with the issues of Indian rights and sovereignty. So I've been asked by the Osage natives, the tribe, the Osage Nation, to film a documentary. It's being produced by Leonardo DiCaprio. And its working title right now is Long Knife, the Osage Nation, Coke, Oil, and the New Trail of Tears. It's about how the Koch brothers made their first billion, or I should say swiped their first billion, from oil from the Osage Reservation, which once sat atop the biggest oil field in America when there was just a little bit of oil left. A little bit means that it went from $1 trillion worth of oil to a few billion. The Bureau of Indian Affairs allowed contracts for Coke Oil. There's a little tiny unknown oil trucking operation out of Wichita, which literally was contracted to go get the remainders of Osage oil. But what they would do is they would literally go out to these remote wells, often dead in the middle of the night where no one was around. They'd suck the oil out of the tanks. This is the Coke oil trucks. Suck the oil of the tanks and take off or during the day, if they were watched, they would leave a slip of paper saying, oh, we took 50 barrels of oil when they took 100. And the steal was, in today's money, about $6 billion. This is the origin of the Koch brothers' billions. They weren't billionaires until they stole this oil. And when I say stole this oil, because I don't want you to get into trouble with your libel lawyers, understand, I have the indictment from the FBI. I'm working with the original FBI leader of the investigation into the Koch oil thefts, and he has photos of the oil theft. He has confessions of 50 of Koch's employees on camera saying that they stole this oil at Charlie Koch's personal demand. If Charlie Koch said, you don't steal that oil from me, they use the fancy term, they use this overage. If you don't get more overage, you lose your job. So it was literally a racketeering operation, and Koch was charged, there's a grand jury impaneled, and Koch was about to be indicted. They drew up an indictment, but then he literally, with the money that he sucked out of the Osage Reservation, bought the U.S. Senate, and they yanked out the prosecutor. They closed down the grand jury, and he walked away with the money and scot-free. And that's the beginning of the Koch political network. But for Koch to be able to have this authority and get away with it, he has to also do something else. He has to control the electoral process. So a lot of his money went into things like the Federalist Society. 5 of our 9 justices have come out of the Federalist Society. And it's the Federalist Society which has gone on this crusade against voting rights. So they got the judges, not only in the Supreme Court, but a third of the judges in the appellate divisions of the federal court system. And of course, they're big funders of other right-wing vote-suppressing groups. And obviously, they were one of the founding operators of the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025. So they understand they can't get away with it unless their guys are in office. So vote suppression, they can't win because, do the math. There's 1% of them and 99% of us. So the us versus them in a democracy, them don't do too well. But now them have control. And that's due to the money and manipulation system legally and this vote trickery, which Jim Crow vote operations, and there's very little attention paid to it, even though everything is on the line.
Greg, really appreciate another incredibly great interview. The work you're doing, obviously, the importance is deepening. It's nice that you can work on this related documentary. But really, indigenous rights, this country, really, it's still, the voting is such a fragile thing. It's unbelievable. You've been warning about the little pitfalls in the system that will allow, for instance, a Trump and a Musk to take over. Are you shocked what you're seeing now?
Yes. You understand, I've been in the worst oilocracies. I was in arrest in Azerbaijan. I was in Kazakhstan, got thrown out of the country. I've been, everywhere from Liberia to Chile and Argentina, covering elections. And I think this is I feel like I'm in Ameristan. It's like I'm back in the Caspian where we have a democracy, but we outlaw any demonstrations or any writing against the regime. One of the reasons I was thrown out is I broke the law by mentioning that the I shouldn't call him the dictator, the duly elected president of Azerbaijan was paid a $160 million bribe by Exxon and BP and friends. And that's incontrovertible. But if you report on that, you go to prison. So luckily, I was just thrown out of the country. But we're heading that way when we see CBS willing to pay Trump personally tens of millions of dollars because they had Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes. And he said that they were too nice to her. Literally. You get sued for that. And that's putting a tremendous chill. And they paid. Musk paid Trump, by the way, $25 million because Trump had sued X because he'd been removed and then he was put back on. But, so forget the First Amendment ain't there. So almost Musk was saying, I'll give you $25 million. Like, why would he have to pay Trump? This is just a way to stick money in his pocket. But the other thing, they're making a point. You come out against us in public, we'll get you. And if you think that we have ways that you never thought of, they're also talking about, don't forget, impeaching federal judges who say this is unconstitutional. They're saying, well, we'll just impeach those federal judges. They're supposed to have lifetime appointments. Okay. Well, yeah, so I'm shocked. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't.
Greg, you've been a financial investigator. The stuff that we're seeing with Musk having access to the U.S. budget, I understand they're just about to get in there to Social Security. They're going to have to cut that back to enhance the tax break. But what do you see here? What do you see happening economically?
Yeah. Well, now I'll put on my hat when I was with the Justice Department and several states' attorneys general as a racketeering and fraud expert civil criminal. To me, what Musk is doing is classic racketeering. Is also what's called the civil rights law, where you have government and private parties in a lockup against the public interest. Now, that used to be, the sheriffs from the old South in the heat of the night locking up with the Ku Klux Klan. But now they've traded in, white sheets for spreadsheets. And what I see Musk doing, and I detailed some of it again in an article at gregpalast.com, it is, I'm sorry, from the old days in the Justice Department, these guys would be charged with racketeering. The problem is they're now in charge of the Justice Department. So it's the most brilliant thing. It's like Capone taking over the cops. So there's no chance that anyone's going to say, this is not just a bad idea. It's a crime. It's a crime. And who's going to bust them? Very serious. This is very, very serious. I got to tell you, Dennis, I thought I've seen it all, and I'm pretty cynical. As any Guardian reporter, we're born cynical. But, man, I could not have seen this coming. I really didn't. I'm ashamed of myself for not catching this. I didn't believe they would go this far. It's further than they ever signaled.
Well, I'm proud that we've had you on all these years to deal with these kinds of issues, and we're not going to hold you much longer. But if I could just ask you this self-serving question as we get ready to ask people to stand up for Free Speech Radio, what kind of infrastructure, what contribution have we made here at KPFA and has Pacifica Radio made to your ability to do your work and get it out? And how fragile do you think this is now? You think they might be coming after us?
Well, let me ask you the first question, what it's done for my work.
Please,
my work would not have made it across the Atlantic. I was living in London and at BBC Television and The Guardian at the same time as a writer and a broadcast reporter. And these investigations of my home country would have died in London if not for, it started out with you, Dennis, and then the Pacifica Network and Amy Goodman and others picked it up in the network, started bringing my reports over. And I would be invisible without your work. For example, the best democracy money can buy was on the New York Times bestseller with 7 months. But if you hadn't started the ball rolling in the United States, the book was first published in England, and it would have stayed there. And so it's not a question of doing something wonderful for me. It's a question of that information about the elections, about the investigations of, for example, Pat Robertson, of George Bush, of the oil industry, of the attempt to overthrow the Chavez government. It goes on and on. The financial vulture attacks. Where else could I put this material out except on the Pacifica Network? And then, later BBC and others started going through the net back into the States. But basically, without Pacifica, if this little light of mine, that's how I think of KPFA. And
thank you.
That gospel song, I'm telling you, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. And so this is our little light, guys, and I'm so thrilled. And is it fragile? Oh, my God. If CBS Network knuckled under this, and you're talking about part of the Redstone Empire, these are not small players. If they knuckled under writing big checks to Donald Trump personally, if you have all these organizations, Facebook paid Trump $10 million. It went to him personally. If demi-trillionaires like Zuckerberg cannot stand up against Trump, if CBS won't stand up against Trump, these suits are going to keep going and going and going, attacking free speech operators and bankrupting you, not by arresting you. Musk is smarter than Putin. He's not going to arrest you. He's not going to shoot you. He's going to sue the stations into oblivion, and God knows who's going to be taking over the Federal Communications Commission. Pacific is always on the edge with the FCC, and my God, this could be a problem.
That's Greg Palast, and he's also a solution when we're talking about the saving of the vote, the protecting the vote, fighting for the vote. Greg has been on there on the front lines again. He's a filmmaker, a journalist. He's many things. New York Times bestsellers, including The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Greg, we thank you for coming back. Please stay safe. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, KPFA and Pacifica. Thank you very much. Bye.
Beautiful. Thank you.